It was during the reign of Augustus Caesar that Jesus of Nazareth was born in the Galilee, in one of the more remote districts of the Roman Empire. His birth date is probably somewhere between 6 and 4 BC, an anomaly in our calendar which we'll deal with in a subsequent lecture. But from the primary Christian sources, nothing is heard of Jesus again, aside from a brief mention in the Gospel according to Luke of an otherwise undocumented visit at the Temple of Jerusalem when Jesus was 12 years old. We hear nothing of him from that point to around the year 30 AD, when Jesus begins his public ministry in the Galilee. At this time, Pontius Pilate is procurator of Judea, ruling from the city of Jerusalem. And after a brief ministry in the Galilee, Jesus does move on to Jerusalem, where he receives a very enthusiastic welcome. His reputation as a prophet had preceded him. In the year 30, or perhaps in the year 33, depending on how you read the individual Gospels, Jesus was crucified. It was during the reign of Tiberius Caesar, and upon his arrest, trial, and crucifixion, his closest followers immediately scattered. Now, by all accounts, that should have ended all mention of Jesus of Nazareth, all mention of his ideas and of his followers. But his followers reported almost immediately that he had risen from the dead. He was then seen by thousands, and it was said by some that he then ascended into heaven. It is probably that same year of his death that news of Jesus the Anointed One reached the imperial capital of Rome. By the year 64 AD, his followers had become a sufficient nuisance to the Romans that when the city of Rome burned down, the reigning emperor Nero found it convenient to use the Christians as a scapegoat for the fire. And in the aftermath of the persecution of Nero against the Christians, the two greatest Christian missionaries, Peter and Paul, were executed. But despite the persecution, the followers of Jesus multiplied, and the followers of Jesus came to the general attention of Roman society in general, and, unfortunately, of the Roman authorities in particular. Now, from this point on, there were intermittent persecutions of the Christians across the empire, but nothing was very well organized by the Roman authorities. But in the year 303 AD, one of the four reigning emperors, a man by the name of Galerius, launched an official empire-wide persecution of the Christians with the specific intent of exterminating Christianity. The persecutions lasted until the year 311, and in that year Galerius lay on his deathbed. Realizing that the persecutions had not done anything towards exterminating Christianity, had not brought the Christians back to the ancestral faith of Rome, Galerius rescinded all of his edicts against the Christian faith. And in the next year, in the year 312, Constantine, fighting for control of the western part of the Roman Empire, had a vision in which he was commanded to fight under the banner of the Christian God. He did, he was victorious, and attributed his victory to Jesus Christ. The next year, in the year 313, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius went to the city of Milan and issued an edict which has become known as the Edict of Toleration, or the Edict of Milan, which legalized for the first time in history the Christian faith. During the reign of the Emperor Theodosius, at the end of the 4th century, Christianity was not just a legal religion, it had become the official religion of the Roman Empire. Well, this course is a history of a movement whose founder died in his prime, a movement whose first adherents panicked and fled at the first sign of trouble, but who would later sacrifice their lives for the persons and the ideals that they had once so readily abandoned. This course is going to be a history of the Christian religion. The aim of the course is to show the history of the birth, growth, and evolution of Christian churches from the time of Jesus. Actually, we're going to start a few centuries before the birth of Jesus, and continue eventually, after 30 lectures, up to and through the Protestant Reformation. This is not a course on Christian dogma, although we're going to include the history of some of the great dogmatic debates. But this is going to be a course on how Christianity was changed by and changed the various societies in which it existed. And for this part one of the course, this idea is particularly important because we could look at Christianity in two ways. We could look at Christianity as something eternal or as something temporal. That is, I know for many of you, Christianity is a matter of faith, but for many people it is a matter of historical investigation. It is a matter of whether you are a believer or an investigator. This is a choice we have to make in this course between being a theologian and a historian. Now, I am not going to presume to lecture anybody on their faith. That is, let's call it the eternal aspect of Christianity. It's a matter for the believer or the unbeliever. But in this course, we will conduct an historical investigation into the temporal aspects of Christianity. The people, the ideas, the laws, the institutions, and the events that can be pegged to specific times and places as much as the historical and archaeological evidence allows us to. An historian and a man of faith have different standards and frameworks of proof. They are not necessarily always incompatible, but they are different. And in a course on the history of Christianity, we are going to opt for the standards and the proof of an historian. Now, the first order of business for us is to recreate the milieu into which Christianity was born. We have to understand the cultures, the religions, the politics, the laws, and the ideas which were current in the last few centuries BC and the first few centuries AD. Because without understanding these things, it is impossible to understand Christianity. Why? Because the Christians spread their message to specific peoples, at specific times, in specific places, speaking and writing in specific languages. They used very well-crafted verbal and artistic images to get their points across and to address the very specific concerns of their audiences. All these things are what we might say are the temporal contingencies of Christianity which formatted the Christian message.